Hi, I'm Bob Dover, and thank you for watching another module in my series on stream restoration in Suburbia with some case studies from Columbia, Maryland. This tech module is focusing on how state and federal environmental justice policies are considered on these projects and using as the case study the Elkhorn Branch project that was proposed in Columbia, Maryland. So, a summary of environmental justice policies. It requires that the impacts of projects on low income and people of color communities be considered in federal permitting decisions, federal actions in general, but including federal permitting decisions. And the communities are usually identified based on self reported data on census forms. And so these analyses don't really evaluate the effect of a project on an individual or on, say, a housing development, but it's more on the entire census block. The purpose of the policies is to prohibit or require adjustments to projects that would have a disproportionate adverse impact on low-income communities and people of color census blocks. And the word disproportionate is key here, and we'll go into that. The policies would also prohibit disproportionate approval of projects that have beneficial impacts on high income or majority white census blocks. These impacts, the adverse and beneficial impacts, would be those that are identified in a relevant NEPA document. So this analysis typically occurs within a NEPA document or is linked to a NEPA document that evaluates adverse and beneficial impacts. So you're not redoing that analysis. You're basing the analysis on the impacts as they were identified in the NEPA document. And then there is a specific analytical methodology for this defined by EPA guidance. For stream restorations in suburban areas, it's important to note, so stream restoration projects are linear projects. And linear projects, so they're long and skinny. Think roads, transmission lines, pipelines, and streams as well. And because of their geometric shape, they have a great deal of contact area with adjacent properties, and they may pass through multiple census blocks. So a 10-acre factory on a square piece of land may contact a few properties on its boundaries. But a 10-acre stream restoration project or linear project could contact dozens or hundreds of individual properties. And because suburban areas include a mix of high income census blocks, low income census blocks, majority white, majority people of color census blocks, the stream restoration projects have the potential to have disproportionate impacts on one or the other. The tree removals, the habitat destruction, the flooding hazards directly adjacent to residential properties may affect those properties or the residents or the home values. Therefore, it is a relevant question to ask whether stream restoration projects have the potential to violate environmental justice policies, and the analysis required for getting an NWP 27 permit to do a stream restoration project requires that the developer do that environmental justice analysis. There is some objectivity in environmental justice analyses. There's also some room for subjectivity. Objectively, you aren't evaluating an impact on, you aren't making your own judgment on whether a community is low income or majority people of color. That's based on the self-reported census data. So that part is completely objective. Then there are some things that can be subjective. There's often disagreement between the developers versus the residents on whether impacts actually exist. their aerial extent, the duration, whether they're beneficial, they're adverse. That it's all unfortunate that some of that can be subjective, but it can also be subjective whether the impacts are disproportionate on one community over another. Now, for the proposed Elkhorn Branch project, in the permit application and some other documents, the developer acknowledged that the project does pass through census blocks that are disadvantaged. The developer acknowledged that those communities will be impacted by the project. It's directly along the property boundaries. It would be hard to say anything else. The developer, in a separate document, acknowledged that at least some of the project impacts would be adverse, and they were mostly referring to construction noise, construction emissions, and things like that. But then they did something remarkable, and I've been working on these projects for a long time, and I've literally never seen this. Usually, when a developer is trying to skirt around this issue, they will simply disagree that the impacts on the disadvantaged communities are disproportionate. They will say, well, yes, there's some disadvantaged communities, we're affecting them, but we're also affecting some other people, and overall, you can't really point that we're being disproportionate on one community or another. In the Elkhorn Branch application, they did the opposite. They actually agreed that the impacts on the disadvantaged communities would be disproportionate. Well, but then it was obvious why they did that, because they then asserted and assumed that yes, this project will disproportionately impact those communities, but all of those impacts will be beneficial. Uh, and and so we're actually not damaging those communities disproportionately. We're actually benefiting them. You should approve our project because, in addition to it being a stream restoration project, we're also improving all kinds of conditions for people living in disadvantaged communities. And to do this, they went ahead and claimed that the project would improve water quality and ecological function, which is questionable. It would protect infrastructure. It would improve visual aesthetics and recreational values, and we'll look at those in a minute. And then they use some flowery language to say that their project, adjacent to these disadvantaged communities, would create safe and accessible spaces for those people to recreate and places for them to interact with nature. It would provide an enormous educational opportunity. I like that one. It wasn't just an educational opportunity, but it was an enormous educational opportunity. And then it would provide a natural amenity to Columbia's residents that they can be passively enjoyed. Well, none of this is true. The actual current condition of Elkhorn Branch is there's no evidence that water quality is impacted. There's no evidence that infrastructure is threatened. There may be impacts to visual aesthetics. The stream has undergone an elevated level of erosion due to increased runoff. But if this has impacted visual aesthetics, it's not noticeable to anybody who lives here. It looks like a stream flowing through the woods, as we'll see. And there are literally no restrictions on recreational uses, human contact with the water, interaction with nature. There's plenty of habitat and vegetation and wildlife in there, and that is far more likely to be educational for the community than removing all of that and instead putting in an engineered stormwater conveyance. Let's look at some photos of Elkhorn Branch today. And the normal idea of a stream restoration project being beneficial for visual impacts would really be for a suburban stream that is surrounded by high buildings, and it has no life, and it's filled with trash. And yes, in those cases, if you do some kind of a cleanup, would it look better for the residents? Yeah, it would. But that's almost more of a trash cleanup than an ecological project. But here you see in suburban Columbia, Maryland, the stream isn't anything like that. It's a nice asphalt path winding through the woods. And the top two photos, you can see the multifamily apartment and condominium buildings on the tops of the hillsides. You can see there's people out there biking. You can see there's tot lots for children to play in. There's absolutely nothing wrong with this area from a visible standpoint or a recreation standpoint. Just contrast that with areas that have undergone stream restoration. In the upper left, again, here's Elkhorn Branch today, and you can see the stream there on the left. Looks like a pretty good place to grow up and let the kids do recreation in nature to me. But the other two photos show two recent stream restoration projects in Howard County, and how anybody could think that that's a visual improvement over the one on the upper left is remarkable. But that, in fact, is what the developer who tried to do the Elkhorn Branch project claimed. Here's just another photo of Elkhorn Branch from near my house. It was taken in early April, so the trees had not leafed out yet, but the tree canopy shades the stream, so the water doesn't get overheated. So yes, it's the ecological conditions have been affected, but there are things that live there, and the tree canopy helps them withstand the summer sun. You can see the bridge there. The Homeowners Association has recently put in dozens of these brand new bridges at $80,000 a piece. And there's hikers, dog walkers, runners, bicyclists on them all the time. In the stream itself, there's natural river riffles. It's a visually attractive stream. There's nothing about it that screams that looks bad because the stream's degraded. And in the bottom, you can actually see within the last couple of weeks that there were beavers out there actually chewing down the trees. Now, another problem with linear projects is that they create the potential for arbitrary decisions in impacts and in considering community input. And considering impacts on a community and deciding whether to proceed is a crucial part of the NEPA process. So, let's just look at a linear project that passes through a couple different census blocks. Some of them are high income, some of them are low income, some of them are low people of color communities, some of them are high. This is just a schematic, but it sort of represents what happened at Elkhorn. Well, what happened was notices went out to obtain public comment. In the single family house communities, they went to the individual residences, but in the multifamily communities and condos and apartments and townhouses, those letters did not go to the individual residents. Instead, they went to a management company for a complex that has 500 units, and the management company threw it away. The other problem was that the notices were trivialized the impacts, did not describe the project. They did not mention that trees would be cut down. They claimed that all impacts would be temporary. So these notices were not distributed to the owners in those multifamily complexes. Well, what happened, as you can imagine, is that some number of residents in the high income census blocks complained. The educational levels there are higher. They had some way to really know more of what was happening. And One of the things that the supporters of the project kept mentioning was the project should be approved because very few community members have opposed it. Only a handful of community members have spoken up. Well, that's almost the reason that these environmental justice policies are in place, is because the people who live in the disadvantaged communities, uh, they may be working 2 or 3 jobs. They don't have time. Maybe they have limited English proficiency, so they don't understand what's in the notices. They've got lower educational levels, so they don't understand. But most importantly, they don't necessarily feel that they have a voice in government decisions and community decisions. And whereas the people who live in the higher income communities, they may have friends in high places. They may have more from their life history that tells them that if they complain, they can get things to go their way. Well, what happened was that the developer did receive complaints from Census Block 1 and eventually decided to drop Census Block 1 from the project. And that would be fine. You can do that on a linear project for technical reasons. If there's technical reasons why Census Block 1 has too many impacts or won't accomplish your objectives, uh, you can delete it. But you can't be arbitrary and delete it because residents in Census Block 1 complained and residents in Census Block 2 didn't. Because that leads to a potential claim, quite frankly, potential litigation, that you're making arbitrary decisions. And so the developer started out by claiming that the adverse impacts during construction were disproportionate on uh, uh, the low income census blocks. But when they removed Census Block 1 from the program, it made it even more disproportionate and therefore even more likely to be challenged by a lawsuit. Now, the project was withdrawn by the developer before it ever reached that stage, but that was a possibility. So there were many issues with public engagement on the project. The residents in the disadvantaged areas were not notified or given the opportunity to review and comment. The notices were not accurate and did not really discuss the issues that the residents would have cared about. And most importantly, there were no extra efforts taken to recognize that the developer should have visited maybe board meetings, community meetings in these disadvantaged communities to try to ensure that those individuals were engaged. So concluding, uh, this showed that the stream restoration developers, at least this one, were not shy about stressing the beneficial impacts and trivializing the adverse impacts. Some of the claims they made border on simply fraudulent about whether these beneficial impacts would somehow be a boon to these disadvantaged populations. It's bordering on ridiculous. But then more worrisome is that the regulatory agencies have really failed to enforce compliance with these policies. This developer wrote those ridiculous claims into the permit application. Apparently, they had gotten away with it before and had not been challenged on it. In their comments on the application, none of the agencies commented on this. They simply let it go by, and it wasn't until I noticed this and wrote it up and sent it into the agencies that anybody even considered that this may be a problem. So this is just one example of how these things are dealt with by these stream restoration companies. My guess is it has happened on multiple projects, and my intention is to keep watching for it on future projects. So thanks for watching this module, and I hope to be recording a few more I have in mind. Thanks.